is not a welcome place for demonstrations, and anybody who tries to disturb the proceeding is going to be echoed out. Secretary Hegseth, General Kane, Ms. McConnell, we're glad to have you here. There's no doubt that the global threat demands from us an uncompromisingly lethal force. And your efforts over recent months to renew the department's focus on lethality and your attention to the concerns of service members at the tip of the spear are worthwhile and appreciated. Of course, sustaining this shift requires a clear strategy and adequate investments in capabilities. So we're looking forward to hearing in detail what exactly the Office of Management and Budget is requesting on behalf of the Department of Defense for this coming fiscal year, and whether this budget flows from a strategy or instead defines and limits the strategy. This hearing will be the first public demonstration of what we hope to be a productive relationship between the subcommittee and the department. In the past, the relationship has functioned best when it's based on timely and forthcoming communication. Last year, details from the department and the services about their growing requirements actually did inform the subcommittee's efforts to mark up a bill to provide the military with $18.8 billion in resources above President Biden's last request. Unfortunately, we all know that didn't become law. Regrettably, the CR we're under right now has yet another missed opportunity that compounded the constraints facing the department. On this subcommittee, you'll find plenty of support for the department's efforts, for example, to improve air and missile defense systems, grow the pipeline for unmanned technologies, modernize our nuclear triad, and expand shipbuilding capacity. But lumping reconciliation spending in with full-year appropriations risks conflating different objectives. Chairman Wicker and his South House counterpart have pointed out already that even an important one-time investment in military modernization is not a substitute for steady growth in the annual budget top line. In fact, it may well end up functioning as a shell game to avoid making the most significant annual investments that we spent years urging the previous administration to make. I struggle to understand, for example, why the administration would cut procurement funding in the base fiscal year 26 budget by $14.4 billion and move that funding into, all of which enjoys strong bipartisan support, while that would be moved into a simple majority reconciliation bill. The fiscal year 26 annual request seems to do just this for Virginia-class submarines, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and B-21 bombers. Like with critical munitions, we should send the services and industry a sustained demand signal by incorporating them into annual appropriations. If we're really serious about making the sustained long-term investments in our military, then let's do it more than just a one-time injection of funding. If the administration wants to request a $1 trillion defense budget for fiscal year 26 and make a full-year investment in urgent priorities and new programs, let's do it. In the meantime, let's not overstate the fiscal 26 request. The administration's requested base defense budget is lower than 15 of the last 20 annual requests, including President Biden's request for fiscal year 25. In fact, fiscal year 26 extends your predecessor's streak to 5 straight base reduction requests that would fail to keep pace with inflation, let alone with the threat of China. But say we do take reconciliation into account, even then, this is hardly the largest funding request for the Department of Defense. In constant dollars, the fiscal year 26 Department of Defense budget request still falls short of the annual funding request for fiscal 08, fiscal year 09, fiscal year 10, and fiscal year 11. As a share of GDP, even including reconciliation, the fiscal year 26 request is still just around 3%. That's not just half the level of the Reagan buildup that secured peace through strength. It's even less than the 4.5% of GDP requested for defense under President Carter. As we've discussed before, I think it's worth repeating, the cost of a war is a lot bigger than preventing a war. At the height of World War II, 37% of our gross domestic product was spent on defense. In Korea, 13%, Vietnam, 9%, the Reagan buildup, 6%. So we know looking strong actually works. Saves money, saves lives. But what we're looking at this year is less than 4.5% of the GDP, which was the last defense request of President Carter. Why should we expect our allies to spend 5% when we're investing about half that? The failure to spend more on defense is compounded by another dynamic. Every year, a greater share of the defense budget goes to cover costs other than modernizing and procuring new weapons and equipment for our fighting forces. Without additional resources, rising personnel and operations and maintenance costs risk crowding out new capabilities. How we will allocate taxpayer dollars is an expression of our political will. We can't expect our adversaries to take American hard power seriously if we don't put our money where our mouth is. But as I mentioned, we're also interested in your articulation of the strategy that informs, or is it informed by, the administration's budget? How does that strategy account for adversary alignment? How does it address not only the threat of conflict in the Indo-Pacific, but the reality of conflict and military threats to our interests in Europe and the Middle East? Most of us on this panel believe that Russia's war in Ukraine, its alignment with the aims of other U.S. adversaries, and its eventual outcome are profoundly important to America's interests and offer more than just a glimpse into the future of warfare. I'd like to hear your views on this conflict. Who is the aggressor? What are the stakes for America in the West? What is the return on investment of our assistance to Ukraine? I don't see funding for Ukraine's security assistance initiative in your budget request. Is it the administration's view that terminating security assistance to Ukraine will make lasting peace more or less likely? What lessons is the U.S. military learning from the conflict? How will the Department of or industry continue to learn if we cut off our partnership with the world's leading battlefield innovators? Why would Asian partners trust us if we abandon partners in Europe? What lessons are China, Iran, and North Korea learning? And how much more will they benefit if Russia prevails? I'd like to hear your views on the impact of war in Europe on other theaters. The Asian and Pacific allies you just met with recently are under no delusions about how unchecked Russian aggression influences the calculus of President Xi. They understand that strategic alignment among adversaries is actually global. They're all communicating with each other. America must recognize in turn that the risk of simultaneous conflict on multiple fronts is real and growing. Your Undersecretary for Policy acknowledged this reality in his confirmation hearing this spring. But the capabilities America needs to prevail in such a conflict do not seem to be reflected in the requests we've received from OMB. So there's a lot we need to cover today. We'll invite you to make opening statements in just a moment, but with that, I'd like to turn to Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you as well, Secretary Hegseth, Chairman Kane, Ms. McDonnell, for joining us here today. We are